First of all, apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Eshalomi, and Assembly Member Arnold is substituting for her today. And Assembly Member Whittle has also given apologies for lateness and may full apologies.
We'll see how that plays out. Declaration of interest, item 2. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations in item 2 and as ever declare any other disclosable pecuniary and relevant interests? Thank you. Item 3. Minutes. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting on the 21st of February to be signed by me as a correct record?
Great.
And 4. Summary list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the completing ongoing actions from the previous meetings? Thank you very much, colleagues. Right, so the main item of business, which is our question and answer session with Sophie, Linden, Sir Craig, Mackey, the main subject of which is to review progress around the police and crime plan 1 year in. But before we go into the bulk of the questions, I think colleagues have got 1 or 2 requests for statements, and I'll ask those colleagues initially to request a statement. I'll start with Sean. Did you want to request a statement?
I wonder if we could get an update on the Grenfell criminal inquiry. I'm not sure we've had one for a couple of meetings. If you have any update on where you're at with that, when you might be interviewing people under caution, charging anybody.
Well, I can give you some detail if it would help. The forensic examination of Grenfell Tower remains on track, and we expect to complete that by the end of March. I think you'll have seen some of the media coverage about the off-site testing phase, which is now underway. This is what identified that a fire door designed to last for 30 minutes only lasted 15 minutes in the fire. The Met has raised this with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government as the lead body. Today is the start of the 2-day public inquiry hearing, so the hearings are also starting today, and we can continue to cooperate with the inquiry and provide material to them. We're currently in the process of facilitating visits by bereaved families. As you can imagine, this has a significant emotional impact, and then it'll be followed by visits by survivors. I think in relation to investigations, I think people will have seen there's been a fraud conviction this week. A woman who falsely claimed to have been resident in the Grenfell Tower fire has been found guilty of 3 counts of fraud and 1 count of possession of an ID document with improper intention. She remained in custody and be sentenced on Friday the 6th. The criminal investigation is still ongoing and will be ongoing. As we said, this is a lengthy and meticulous process. So we're not planning on giving running commentaries. I think the issue around the testing, we always said if there was issues we discovered in testing, we would highlight them, tell the relevant authority, so decisions can be made.
Thank you. Andrew.
Yes, a couple of things, please, Craig. First of all, the Salisbury attack on the Russians. I just wondered what our commitment was in relation to resources, because we've seen the news that a lot of people have been working in Salisbury and what impact that may have on policing in the capital. And the other question is, a few days ago there was an email hoax threat to quite a lot of schools, and some of them have been closing down and so forth, and I wonder what you were doing to investigate that.
By all means. Shall I start with Salisbury? I think all of us have seen the events in Salisbury and have seen the impact it's had. What's happened there, and I'll separate it into 2 groups of demands that have been placed on sort of policing across the country. So there's the work in terms of the investigation, which, as you know, is being led by the counter-terrorism network. One of the great advantages we have in this country is it is a network, so it's used to being able to flex its resources across that network, and that's entirely appropriate that the support's done in relation to that, and that is not causing any short-term impact or problems for us in London in terms of our ability to respond to things. The other work that's going on, and colleagues will be aware that we have this capability in the UK, is the mobilisation of mutual aid. So a number of forces across the country are supporting colleagues in Wiltshire with things like people to scene guards, people to do various bits of the investigation and process. And again, that's quite a normal demand that the service can cope with quite well. We met with colleagues earlier in the week from National Policing to look at the impact across the piece. We're quite happy as a police service that we can cope collectively with that. In relation to the school bomb hoaxes, the investigation of that is being led by the National Crime Agency. There is an ongoing investigation, I think the one you're referring to went to, we think, about 400 schools across the UK, of which a number were in London. As you probably know, the history of assessing bomb threats here is the Metropolitan Police Service through SO15 have the national responsibility for grading bomb threats. That relates back to the days of the challenges with Northern Ireland. Surprisingly, that goes on virtually every day behind the scenes in terms of what we do. We were aware there were a large number of threats. These threats were looked at, assessed, and deemed not credible. I know some educational establishments chose to evacuate. That's clearly an issue for them. The ongoing investigation, as I say, is being led by the National Crime Agency, who I know are working with the Department of Education in relation to plans and processes around these sorts of things.
Thank you for that. Clearly, Grenfell and potentially Salisbury, the committee will continue to take a further interest, and indeed the latter subject as well. Okay, great. We turn to the main bulk of the question. I'm conscious today, Craig, that you need to go and...
If I can, Chair, my apologies.
Senior international types at 12:30, so we'll be finished. You'll be leaving at 12:15, as will the rest of us in theory. So, we move now to questions to the Deputy Mayor around the police and crime plan, which is 1 year on from publication, which is indeed 2 years on, in essence, into the mayoral term. Aspirations around that was that, I think you actually said that it's critical that the plan inspires confidence in both the police, in its leadership, and the public of the police. My first question to you, Deputy Mayor, is the plan achieving these aims?
It is a year on. I think we published it a year yesterday, and obviously since 2 days after the publication of the attack, just to put it in of the plan, just to put it in context, we had the Westminster Bridge attack and the following awful incidents in London. Is the plan achieving its aim? We are setting out absolutely, and we've got the delivery plans being developed to ensure that we do achieve our aim. We are delivering many of the commitments within that, and we are holding in terms of the plan and the statutory responsibilities of myself and MOPAC and the Mayor, holding the Metropolitan Police and convening partners to ensure that they can deliver the commitments within the plan.
The targets, I think, in your own words, are more sophisticated than previous Matrix 6 targets. And we'll get into certain subjects and details later around how those figures may be going in the right or the wrong connection. But would you be able to summarise yourself a year on, or indeed 2 years into the mayoralty, areas, headlines, where you're making good progress, and those areas where you feel you're not making good progress?
We published the plan. Obviously, we are 2 years into the mayoralty, or nearly 2 years into the mayoralty, and as you know yourself, that the first year was covered by the previous administration's police and crime plan. So it is a year into the police and crime plan. What we were very clear about when we published was that these were our commitments and our what we wanted to deliver, but what was really, really crucial in our ability to deliver was the sufficient funding from the government, that we were actually setting out with high aspirations and high, really important commitments, but the achievements of the plan were going to be made much more difficult if the government didn't step up and fund the police in the way it should have done. And as we all know, and you know, and very well aware, the government has not done that, and we are still looking to make significant savings in the Metropolitan Police. But in terms of what have we done in the last year in delivery of the police and crime plan, we committed ourselves to delivering a knife crime strategy. We have published a comprehensive knife crime strategy. It's not just the publication of the knife crime strategy. We have also put significant funds behind that in terms of the Mayor's Youth Fund, £45 million in the next 3 years, £110 million for the Metropolitan Police, £15 million specifically on knife crime, on violence against women and girls. We have continued to ensure that we are commissioning the victim services that are appropriate for those that are survivors or victims of violence against women and girls. We have appointed London's first Victims Commissioner. She has absolutely made a fantastic difference in focusing on that commitment within the police and crime plan of putting victims at the heart of everything we do. And today she is launching and publishing a review of the Victims Code of Practice, which was again commitments within the police and crime plan. On hate crime and tackling hate crime and extremism, we put in the police and crime plan that we would be working to look at what was happening in countering violent extremism. The Mayor and myself and the Deputy Mayor for Social Integration are leading a programme of work around countering violent extremism. That is getting up and running. And also on hate crime, the online hate crime hub has been launched and has, I think, investigated over 500 cases since its launch.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, we understand the narrative around the finances, and you made that point, which is a point made. But we want to really be talking about performance. And I hear what you say about initiatives and inputs, and that is good. But this committee will be judging yourself and the Mayor on the performance of the plan through the matrix of performance that we have here. My last point before we move it on to actually going into the various areas, which is around the issue of confidence with a large C. The previous Mayor, rightly or wrongly, had a measure around confidence as one figure. I think you have, through your plan, disseminated the wrong word, but split that confidence figure out into different themes. One of the problems with that is it's not so clear as to how the Met are doing with confidence. The previous measure, we were going along at 70, we were aiming at 80, we were never going to get there. Could you really, just for clarity, it's maybe one for you, Craig, is at present, what is the confidence figure for Londoners in the Met Police? I'm not talking about satisfaction, I'm talking about confidence of Londoners.
So you're talking about public perception of the police and chart which is
what I rather lazily called the confidence figure with a large C.
Yeah, it's from the public attitude survey.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. Previous administration just totted up all the different things that went into it. I think it was 7 different indicators went into that public perception figure. You could never really understand what was driving that public perception figure or what the issues were underneath it. And that's why we took the decision to be, I think, more transparent around it, to disaggregate it, and you have that chart on page 94.
Just tell me for the sake of record what it is at the moment then.
Overall, we've changed the way in which it's reported in terms of disaggregating it. I can get back to you if you want us to aggregate it back up.
I'd just like a simple figure that Londoners can understand.
Okay, we have got.
So these are the sophisticated measures that we're looking at that are quite difficult.
So
Craig, help us on this.
Good job confidence, and bear in mind that these are last autumn's cut of figures is 68%. Satisfaction is 74%.
Satisfaction tends to be higher.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So satisfaction, for the benefit of the record, of people who've usually engaged with the service. The confidence might not necessarily have engaged with.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that one. Before we move on to the next section, I mean, to me that tells me that if you're trying to do more sophisticated measures, it means sometimes they don't always leap out at us with clarity. Right.
I was just looking at the wrong measure. I thought you were talking about public perception of the police, which when you talk about disaggregating, that's the disaggregation that we've got. That's why I was answering that bit of the question.
Thank you for that. Right, but now we're going to move on to subjects that actually are within the plan and with itself. Now, how we structure this ourselves is based on the way the plan itself structures on your measures. So the first subject is tackling violence against women and girls. Susan, I think you're leading on this.
So, thank you. So can you very briefly outline your plans for the delivery of this revived strategy? For example, what actions do you expect to take in the short term? And actually, what outcomes do you expect to have within the next 12 months?
So next
12 months.
So we did publish the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy about 2 weeks ago, which was based on the police and crime plan and the commitments within that. In terms of what we expect to be delivered in 2018-19 and into 2020-21, we are working on a new sexual violence model, which will be one that will have better services to support victims of sexual abuse and better services to help them navigate a really complicated landscape of policing, health, courts and the criminal justice. We will continue to deliver alongside London councils the harmful practices training of nurses, midwives and social workers, which will which is around focusing on female genital mutilation. That's a joint. We are putting £200,000 in, and that is being match funded and more by London councils. We were successful last year in getting money from the Home Office to work with other forces on an innovative programme of tackling and working with those perpetrators of domestic violence, which are the most high harm ones, which is the DRIVE programme. We will be delivering that, and again it's around supporting and trying to change the behaviour of those really high harm perpetrators. Those, in terms of outcomes of that, what we'll be looking for is a change in offending and a decrease in the risk that they're posing to women. We've also have a programme on tackling stalking, including a stalking threat assessment centre for London. That's over £4 million that will be going in next year, next financial year and the following year. Again, that we're working with Cheshire and Hampshire to deliver that. We expect that to be up and running this year and to be making a difference to victims of stalking and survivors of stalking. And we are ongoing, we are joining up with the United Nations around UN Safer Cities programme. We are at the last stages of finalising that and signing that as an agreement to get London to be part of that Safer Cities programme and actually to be one of the beacons of good practice on that.
Okay, if we can home in a bit more, you must be aware that many of us are very concerned that there's no specifics in any of the strategies coming out for something we can sit here in a year's time and judge you on specifically. I have read all 100 pages of your strategy, and it constantly says we will continue to do this, we will look into doing that. There's nothing specific, and we hope to get to this level or that way. It's just not in there. So if I said to you, if we're sitting here in a year's time, what would you like to say in proper terms that you would have achieved by then? Because at the moment we're looking at crime stats, and unfortunately they're really going in the wrong direction. So what in a year's time can you say to me you will have delivered on this specific strategy?
So on top of the deliveries that I've just outlined in terms of the
what outcomes
that I've just outlined,
what actual outcomes from that investment?
If you look at crime statistics, you'll know, and we've had this discussion many times around domestic abuse and domestic violence and sexual violence, that to set a target of reducing sexual violence and domestic violence, it sounds very it sounds like something you would want to grab hold of, but actually what we want to do and what we're very clear about is we want to increase reporting, because at the moment we know that there is a large iceberg underneath the reports of violence against women and girls that we see coming forward towards the police. We know that there are many, many women and girls who are not reporting the incidents of violence that they are suffering. So we want to see an increase in that. We also, in terms of what I would like to see at the end of next year, I'd like to see that, and I know that this will happen because I have absolute confidence in our Victims Commissioner, of the review of the Victims Code of Practice and improvement of the services that victims get, and that is part of the work that is ongoing.
Okay, we still aren't getting anything that we can actually hold your feet to and say, you said this would happen on that. It's all very well saying you want to see more reporting. There might be more reporting because there's a hell of a lot more instances of this crime going on. And I think it was either at the last meeting or the meeting before that, Craig actually said he didn't know whether it was just a case of increased reporting that is making these figures go up and up, and which is a fair comment. What are you aiming to reduce in numbers?
So we've had this discussion before, haven't we, many times?
Yes, and I get nowhere because we're not getting any specific answers to questions.
Whether it's an increase in reporting or an increase in incidents. And we are, MOPAC, our evidence and insight team at the moment in MOPAC is working and has been scoping a piece of research which will hopefully get to the bottom of this. It is a very complex question. If it was easy to do so, we would have answered it already. They are already scoping that and looking at the research. I hope, and one of the things that they've promised myself and the Violence Against Women and Girls team within MOPAC is that we'll have the results of that by autumn, so we'll have a better understanding of whether it is an increase in confidence in reporting, an increase in incidents, or, which I suspect may be the case, both. So we will have a much better understanding of that by autumn. If you're touching, basically focusing on the perennial question that we also discuss at every Police and Crime Committee around, do you pick numerical targets or do you have a direction of travel, and do you have more sophisticated performance measures to ensure that you are able to have proper oversight of what is happening within the police service, as well as crime and, you know, in the courts. You are... most police forces in Britain, in England and Wales, have moved away from numerical targets. Greater Manchester Police, in its draft police and crime plan, has very much looked towards harm and vulnerability in the way this police and crime plan does. Thames Valley has done the same. This is not picking out numerical targets creates perverse behaviours. What matters is to have a very good performance framework, very good performance management, and I know that's something that the Deputy Commissioner is heading up and leading within the Metropolitan Police.
If the direction of travel was going in the right direction, we would not be so concerned. We are here to scrutinise what's happening. We can't get specific figures that you're aiming to. The direction of travel is the wrong direction. We are concerned. We want to help to try and get to the bottom of this. But by this, we need some sort of figures as to what you're aiming for specifically. But you're not going to give them to me, so
Can I just
I'll go to the next
if I may
question,
just
Chair.
answer that, because previously every month there were the monthly crime statistics published, and we now have a very in-depth quarterly performance report. So it's not that there isn't any information around what is happening. We know that, yes, absolutely, crime is increasing in London, as it is across England and Wales. It is actually increasing at a slower rate within London than it is nationally. And that is something that we are obviously very, very concerned about. The lack of a numerical target plucked out of the air does not mean that there is not strong performance management. What we are looking for and what we want to have is year-on-year reductions. We are battling that at the moment because crime is going up in London and England and across the country, in fact at a faster rate.
Jeanette, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you for those answers, Sophie. Now, can I also say I welcome the launch of the document. It's been well consulted on across London, and the document itself, I know from feedback I've received, sort of meets the aspirations of a number of activists. And again, to see that the Mayor, yourself, and MOPAC and the MPS are acknowledging that violence against women and crime is the most important issue facing our city has got to be welcomed. I share my colleagues' concerns in terms of we're used to numerical targets, so without saying the percentage that we'd be looking for to see the decrease, you can get just a little bit uncomfortable. But if we then focus on prevention, prevention actually doesn't lend itself to a numerical target. What it does lend itself to is working with communities, working with practitioners. So in the Mayor's Vogue strategy, there's a commitment of 200k to harmful practices, which will increase the training of those who may come into contact with victims of harmful practices, such as midwives, nurses, social workers and police officers. What I'm unclear about is how this will be spent and what percentage, for instance, will go to FGM when you think we have such awful practices like forced marriages. I mean, the latest thing that we're knowing about is breast pressing and all sorts of other unimaginable things going on. 200k thinly spread will not really give us something tangible in terms of the number of practitioners trained. I would argue that you should be looking to focus that. Have you got any thoughts about that, focusing that, so we can actually then see professionals trained to go into communities and be able to do preventative work?
The £200,000 is the money that MOPAC is putting in, and it's going to be match funded by London councils We are discussing with them exactly what that will be. That will be more than the 200,000, so it will be more than 400,000 in all. So it isn't just that money that is going in. The pilot that took place around what was the best way of tackling harmful practice, and FGM is the absolute focus on this, and I can get back to you with the percentage proportion that is actually just about FGM, but it is nearly all about FGM in terms of that money. The pilot programme that took place, the learning from that was that the real key element of that was the training of nurses and midwives around FGM, and that is what that will be doing to deliver. In terms of the numbers of nurses and midwives, I can get back to you on the specifics of that, because that is certainly something that we have. I just haven't got it in front of me.
Yes, well, that's welcome, because that's number 4 of the recommendations that we outlined as the Assembly in this document, which I know that you accepted. So that's good to hear, and I'd look forward to receiving more information. And lastly, just briefly, I received a text from the National Centre of FGM, and they have got one of the most widely accepted and evaluated programme working with professionals, and they're already working with some boroughs in London. Do you know of the work that they're doing of boroughs in London? Have your officers spoken to the centre recently?
Yes, the National Centre for FGM is something that the officers do work with and discuss the programmes with. Whether they're aware of all the specific programmes that are taking place in London boroughs, I wouldn't know. But it's certainly in terms of the pilot that took place, there were those discussions around that programme.
And I'm sure you'll join me in congratulating Kensington and Chelsea on the award that they've recently made specifically to working on FGM. I say that they should be congratulated because if we're going to follow the top 15 boroughs with high indicators, Kensington and Chelsea is nowhere near that. But I think what that shows is a borough who is knowing that, again, it's not the numerical number, it's that if one child is at risk in their borough, they're wanting to find out. So well done, Kensington and Chelsea.
Absolutely, it's fantastic that Kensington and Chelsea are putting money into this.
Susan?
Thank you. I'm going on to the next question. Yes.
Indeed,
Yes.
Linden.
Okay. Can you tell me, please, what actions you've taken in the last year to address the low rates of people being proceeded against for domestic abuse and sexual violence, and why hasn't it translated into better performance yet?
So the issue of the low numbers of proceedings around domestic abuse and domestic violence is one that's complex because it's across the police service, it's into the courts, and it's also about victim support. In terms of what action I have taken in looking at and the oversight of this, it is something that the Violence Against Women and Girls Board has specifically looked at, and had discussions with the CPS, the police around quality of case files coming forward, around the sharing of 999 calls, the sharing of the body-worn video when officers do turn up to an incident. That is something that has been pushed and driven. The rollout of body-worn video is it's incredibly important in a lot of areas of policing. One of the particular areas that I'm very optimistic about is around domestic abuse and domestic violence, because that video evidence of the officer turning up is there, caught and captured, and is very, very useful in court. Now, that is from the police side of things. There's obviously the CPS and how they are working, and then the timeliness of the courts. The Victims Commissioner is doing a deep dive around rape cases to understand what it is that's causing the problems in timeliness, because I think the average of a rape case getting to court is around 2 years, and that's one of the reasons why victims and survivors, in terms of prosecutions, it doesn't come to fruition because it takes so long, and you get what's called attrition with victims and survivors no longer willing to take that case forward because of the time it has taken.
I accept and agree completely it should not take that amount of time. One thing I will say to you, though, is that lots of these body-worn cameras have been out there for a long time. And when I was leader of Harrow, I paid for them through Harrow Council, and we weren't part of the rollout to the various boroughs that were testing them. So that was 4 years ago. So they have been out a long time. We can't keep saying, oh, they're going out. And they are brilliant because that's what they were being used for then. So at some point we've got to stop saying, and there's the rollout of the cameras. They are fantastic. I'm a massive supporter of them. But, you know, we've got to start looking at other things because they've been around long enough. Craig, did you want to say?
Can I just say against the, hopefully to put it in context, so the London DA conviction rate has gone up consistently over the last 10 years. So we are going up. We're about 10 percentage points behind the national, which is the thing we focus on and worry about. Why is there that gap? And I think, as the Deputy Mayor said, what we're trying to understand at the moment is that gap something we do at the police end? Is it something the way the system works in London? Because I can't believe we've got fundamentally different people in London as taken as a totality when you look at the numbers. So there's been a constant move of that process upwards. There is some, at the moment, it's hard looking at the figures in the system, particularly around the high-end rape and serious sexual offences, because of some of the impact we're seeing on the disclosure issues. So we've spoken before about the disclosure reviews post what's been called the Allen case, and this decisions around how much to disclose, what discloses. So at the high end, there's that. I think you're right around body-worn video. We're starting to see the benefits of that. I think the other bit of body-worn that does work better now is we're sharing routinely now about 3,000 clips a month directly with the CPS. The days of printing these off on a DVD and taking them are long gone. So that's been a huge step forward. The victimless prosecutions we're starting to see, although I don't like the terminology because there's always a victim, but the lack of victim support for the prosecution, we're starting to see those rise. So I think in the DA space, yes. I think the critical bit in some of your early questions, that one we all need, and you've touched on that, I think we shouldn't underestimate that piece of research that the Deputy Mayor referred to. I think getting that done to try and get the insight for us all as to what's going on in that data is absolutely crucial, because I think that will help inform better policy responses. And on domestic abuse, just one figure that struck with me when we were doing some violence work the other day wider in the Met about something that's probably worked over 10 or 15 years, and some colleagues will remember this. So last year's homicide figures for London, whilst they were extremely challenging, the bit that got virtually no coverage, we were down to 9 domestic homicides last year, which is very different to the profile of the homicide mix we saw in London 10, 15 years ago. So something collectively, now I don't know yet, well, that's part of the research, whether that's a fluke, whether it's a statistical thing, doesn't look like it from the data, but I think collectively it shows when we work on these things, we can do things.
The research is vital. I am sure, although forgive me if I'm wrong, having read this document through once and nearly twice, I'm sure somewhere it said that you hadn't started that research yet. Are you saying you have started the research?
The Evidence and Insight team have undertaken the scoping of that research to look at what is already available through, for example, the Public Attitude Survey, where we know the number of women who are reporting that they've been victims of sexual violence or domestic violence, and we also know the number that reported it. So there's a significant piece of work already undertaken around scoping, and then from that piece of work, they will do another piece of research which should come to fruition in the autumn.
The trouble is, we were told that this strategy would come through in the autumn, and here we are months later. Clearly, this is a very important piece of work, because we've got to get to understand what's going on here. It's very serious. I mean, Len has, since I've been on the authority, been championing this cause all the way through and concerned about it. If it's only being scoped, it's not actually started yet. The specifics.
In order to, I mean, I'm not a I'm not a researcher, I'm not a evidence and insight person, but in order to ensure that a piece of research is robust, as looking at the right things, you have to scope it, otherwise you go off in tangents and start researching things already there. These things so it has started,
it's
it will come to fruition in the autumn.
Work.
It is
I
indeed,
hope it starts very soon.
And that's why we committed to doing this piece of work, and it will be delivered.
Okay, all right. Len, you've been named checks, over to you.
Very much. Can I look? I think we should firstly say we welcome this strategy, and we know there's more work to do. And I think we understand that. And I suppose the frustration from that more work to do is that it's such a wide-ranging area. Where do we target our precious resources to make that real difference? So I think we get that bit. And can I thank MOPAC and the Mayor's support for the abusers list issue, because I recognise in the document that you are focusing on preventative work, but you're also placing some real pressure on the perpetuators of these crimes against young women and girls. So I just want to turn really to Craig. I've been doing a lot of work supporting the Assembly's abusers list with your senior colleague Martin Hewitt and others. You've got some really, I think, cutting-edge work on Dauntless Plus, where you've identified, I think, initially 700 most violent or high-risk offenders in domestic violence and abuse. Not quite on the wider issues, but I think on the physical violence, if we can focus in that. We know it takes many forms. And you've got that down to 400 that you are trying to track within the resources that you've got. One of the issues that we know is domestic violence, and along the policing piece itself, is about some of the inconsistencies of the Met. The experience of those leading and the best practice and adopting best practice to follow. So I think there's one issue there. But do you think, can I just say, if we can own in on one, because I think in managing the risk, and we've seen that you can't, it's not the silver bullet, but we saw from yesterday, and I've been open about that there would be problems, but in managing a risk, an adoption of an abusers list in this area of work, could it save lives and, in terms of protect children involved in these circumstances, involved in domestic abuse? Is the thinking of police of where that? When do you think your ACPO, the former ACPO, did a value for money study on it and said, yes, it made sense to adopt those issues? But I want to focus on an issue about, get your view on this. It's more about the onus of, all too often, I think in this crime, the pressure is on the victims, right? How do we put the pressure, not just on people that have gone through the courts, but put it onto the perpetrators? Do you not think one of the useful things of the list of actually being told where people live, when they establish new relationships, and some of those that the abusers list would come into its own, just enforcing that as an additional penalty on perpetrators of these crimes?
But so, I mean, I've had this conversation a number of times. I think as part of a wider package, when you see it with domestic violence prevention orders, you see it with the Clare's Law work, you see it with a number of those other things, I think it absolutely has got a place in terms of doing it. Anything that can provide that extra protection and insight for people has got to be helpful. I think, like all of these things, candidly, the devil's in the detail. It always is. And what I don't think you want to do, and I don't think you're arguing for, is you don't want to rush to create something so wide and encompassing that it means every third person's on a list for something. Because I think we give an unrealistic expectation then to the public about monitoring those high risks. But I think, as you say, when you look at some of the work done by the Dauntless Plus work, it is really quite insightful in terms of that cohort of people for whom this pattern of behaviour, coercive control, violence is almost a way of being. We need something collectively to tackle that.
Jude, and just in terms, just explain for the rest of the committee, for myself, and just in my mind, you can have lists within lists in managing risk.
Yes, yeah.
And that's what we do, don't we? We do that in the sexual offenders list, we do that in the counter-terrorism list, we have list within lists of where we target.
And the lists are based on risk assessment. So let's do sex offenders, because I think so some sex offenders would be graded and rated as a low risk, might require just checking where they are once a year, might require updates. Other, towards the high risk end, might have a completely different package around them. And the skill and the experience, and you'll know this from colleagues in probation service and CRC, is doing those risk assessments, because that's not an exact science.
Okay, thank you for that. We're moving on now, thank you for that discussion, to the next subset of targets within the plan, which is a broad subject of keeping children and young people safe. Now, within that, we'll be looking at clearly CSE and safeguarding, but also knife crime and young people's chances of becoming victims of crime. Obviously, last night, again, we lost another person over in Stratford. I think this week we've lost 8 people in a week. Not all young people and not all knife crime, but I think it's worth to comment around that. So, Sean, do you want to lead the first set of questions?
Do we want the Deputy Mayor to answer back to your question?
You may wish to comment. We did speak earlier on the fact that we lost someone last night, and we've lost almost unprecedented, from my lengthy memory, 8 people in a week. Different issues, different circumstances. Did you want to comment at all on that in itself?
No, I mean, obviously, Chair, you know, our teams are focused day and night to try and prevent these things happening. I think the important thing with these is to look at the individual incidents, because they are quite different, as you say. These are not all knife crime, and different tactics will be required for each. And interestingly as well, there's quite a different range of age groups as well. Yeah. So absolutely is a key part of our focus, and I'm sure we'll come on to it around the sector work, but also the Viper work and some of the Trident work as well.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
Okay, so moving back onto the MOPAC measures and targets. One of the measures is a goal to reduce the risk of young people becoming victims of crime. We've been looking at the statistics. There seems to be an increase within the statistics on that particular measure. And a lot of the focus is on knives and guns, but if you can comment on more broadly the risk of young people becoming victims of crime and how you're doing on that that measure at the moment.
So, I mean, just in terms of the awful incidents that have happened this week, it is, every time I read about those dreadful incidents, it's just, your heart goes out to the families. It is just awful. It is very, very difficult. And we are seeing, you know, we are saying that we do have an issue in London around violence. It is an issue that's very, very concerning and that we're prioritising. But it's not no comfort, but it is a problem that is across England and Wales. I mean, the Home Secretary called Police and Crime Commissioners together and Chief Constables together last week after we asked her to, because of this being a national problem around violence, before the publication of long-awaited government's violence reduction strategy, which we haven't yet seen. In terms of other young people and trying to keep them safe, we are obviously working very hard around the violence section, part of that, but there is also the work that is ongoing around child sexual exploitation and child protection and around county lines as well, to the work that we're doing with the Metropolitan Police as well as across partners to try to ensure that young people are less at risk of that as well.
But broadly, the risk is going up, is what you're saying, and this is, it's not just the knife crime, there's an overall increase in victimisation of children.
So definitely seeing an increase in victimisation of young people around, particularly around the most serious crimes around homicide, but we are also seeing, increases in reports around sexual violence and child protection. Yes, it's concerning.
One bit of data we tried to find, which we couldn't, was the number of first-time entrants into the criminal justice system. The reoffending dashboard doesn't have any data past December 2016, and you may not have that with you today, but if we can ask for that, that would be useful to see.
So overall, as you'll know, there's been significant decreases in the first-time entrants to the criminal justice system.
Up to that point, yeah.
And continuing.
Okay.
One of the particular issues that obviously the Lammy report also drilled down on is the disproportionality within that, because the decreases were very, very significant across the board, but not significant enough and not in line for black and minority ethnic young people. And there is a real issue in that, and that's why one of the themes within the Police and Crime Plan is looking at that disproportionality and the inequality in victimisation as well as in offending. And we did have a Justice Matters on that, was it last week or the week before last, which specifically looked at disproportionality for young people, but also for adults.
And there has also been quite a national debate around that figure as well. So there's a piece of work going on, I think the Home Office are looking at it, in terms of the thinking around it. So the limiting first-time entrance to the criminal justice process as an overall policy, most people would support, but there is a cohort of belief and idea about whether it works for some people who are on a trajectory to be the most prolific offenders, i.e. at an early stage turning everyone away. Does it work for everyone? Now that's no further than, is that part of a challenge we've got in the wider criminal justice process? But that is one of the debates going on, certainly across policing and colleagues elsewhere at the moment.
Thank you very much. I also have a question about the perception of risk among young people. I asked a mayor's question about knives found in schools, and we know that young people are fearful of their safety, and potentially that might drive carrying knives. There's been quite a large increase in the number of knives found in schools. The year-on-year data, 2011, I was told 144 in a year. I mean, that's not that many, but it's too many. And then in 2017, 346. That's quite a large increase. Is that something you can comment on, and what actions are you taking to reduce that?
I'm actually not surprised by that. I think when you look at the backdrop and awareness around the issues around knife crime, and I'm sure the Deputy Mayor will have a view, you'll know we've spoken before around, and it's getting much better, some schools who for a whole variety of reasons didn't want to talk about some of these issues. I think a lot of those were through so I think there's a much wider awareness out there. The rollout of the increased rollout of schools officers, the use increasingly of technology around schools. That we've spoken a lot during the sector operations around things like knife sweeps and looking for areas where knives are deposited. So I'm not unsurprised, of course concerned, but not unsurprised that number's going up. Would the statistics that I was given include sector sweeps on school grounds as well as schools? Oh gosh, good question. I let me have a look. I'll find out for you. Because that would be useful to know. Yeah, I'll find out for you. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that in terms of safety at school. I mean, it is concerning that there has been an increase in knives found, and it may be, Craig is right that it's probably part of the result of having schools officers in and better understanding and more of an understanding of safety in schools. And that is why, of course, we have been offering head teachers wands and asking them to work with their Safe Schools officers to ensure that there is absolute message to young people, really clear message. And many schools are fantastic in this message over. So, well, one, it's not acceptable to carry a knife, full stop, but it's absolutely unacceptable to bring it into school. Schools have to be safe places. In my experience as a counsellor, I've certainly spoken to young people who have lots of tensions outside of school and gang tensions outside of school. And when I ask them, well, what happens when you get to school? It's a safe place, and those tensions are put aside, which is absolutely vital if we are really to do that long-term prevention around violence and young people. Because obviously, and I know we all agree, that when children go to school and young people go to school, what they need to be concerned about is their studies, not their safety.
Thank you. My final question is, what work has been carried out so far to identify youth crime hotspots, and what resources are you putting into that?
That's certainly we're working with the Met around the analytics around that in terms of knife crime. If you take knife crime in particular, there is a very, very good evaluation and assessment of where the what we call hotspots are. We are working with those boroughs where they have the most violent, the most knife crime. 25% of the knife crime in some boroughs, and not in one borough, but across some boroughs. We are working very closely with them. We've had 2 meetings with them and the boroughs, the borough commanders, around what their action plans are looking at, how we can help them with their action plans and how we can support them with their action plans. And that work is ongoing.
And are you putting extra resources into the boroughs to support that, as opposed to just, it seems like mainly what you just said was advice rather than...
Yes, I mean, in terms of the money that there are resources going into the £15 million to the Metropolitan Police for the next financial year around knife crime. I mean, I expect that to be, it's operational decision, but I expect that to be prioritised in terms of where the hotspots are and where the most, the problems are. The community seed funding that we announced yesterday, that was has gone across a number of boroughs, but very much we encouraged and wanted it to be in those boroughs that have the highest knife crime and the violence that's occurring. And of course there's extra money going into the Metropolitan Police next year overall, which again is about prioritising those areas that have the worst incidents.
But indeed, I mean, knife crime figures are something that we can measure very clearly, and Andrew's going to come in a minute with some detail around it. With 31% increase, 16 to 17, and this year it's a fact that the crime figures are spiralling. Andrew, you want to investigate this?
Yes, if I could. Can I just come back to schools briefly first, though? I mean, I suppose what you're saying, Craig, is the numbers going up. What we don't know is whether there is absolutely more knives in schools, or we're better at finding them for the same number.
Yeah, I think that's implicit in the... I can't answer that question for you. I don't have that.
No, so we just don't know. It's, as they say, a known unknown.
But I think, yes. But I think the important point is they're being called out, they're being found, they're being covered, and we're keeping schools collectively a safe place.
Yeah. Coming on to that then, we've got the offer of the knife ones for schools, but one of the things I think is of concern is the relatively small number of schools that have taken up the offer, because heads have some sort of fear of reputational damage to the school if they seem to be taking a knife wand. What are we trying to do to convince heads that that's not a very good approach to this issue?
So we're working with Ofsted at the moment and have been working for a number of months with Ofsted around what their inspection framework, how their inspection framework can help and support schools to take this element of safeguarding seriously. Schools have safeguarding in their DNA, absolutely, around child protection and sexual exploitation, absolutely is there. What we're working with Ofsted in is to say part of that safeguarding is around knives and violence as well. Many schools are brilliant at this. We need to just support those other schools that need to have that more as part of what they are doing. Ofsted we've had meetings with them. I have spoken to all the inspectors of schools in London to ask them what are you doing when you go into schools, and they are at the moment developing they are working on a thematic which will be published by September around what is happening in schools and what the inspection process should look like. It is happening. I have certainly heard back from schools that when their Ofsted inspections have come in, these are the types of questions that they are asking.
And Craig, where are we with dedicated schools officers?
Well, as you know, we're part way through the rollout. We've committed to the numbers we've said we'll do in terms of that. So as the changes with the BCUs continues, those rollout will continue. I don't have the figure. I thought you were going to ask me the figure on knife wands. We will find it out for you.
I think we had that figure not so long ago.
Oh, right, okay, right.
It wasn't very many, sure.
But my sense, just picking up on what the Deputy Mayor says, my sense is that in fairness to colleagues across education, they're moving quite dramatically on this issue. I think the involvement of Ofsted, the approach of seeing this as part of the safeguarding requirement has helped in this space, and I think it will continue to help in this space. And certainly, I know Martin Hewitt and others have been quite heavily involved in that work.
Well, thanks for that. And I think if Ofsted are taking this seriously and getting involved, that's a very important measure to try and get the head. It's one thing a head teachers are frightened of, it's Ofsted. So we need to really get
a head teacher now.
really get involved in that.
Yeah.
Sophie, as you know, last month we had a couple of quite nasty murders in Camden within half a mile of each other within a very short time, and I don't really want to probe that because I know they're now subject to criminal prosecution. They've charged people with those offences. But you recently described knife crime as a crisis. Do you think what you're doing is starting to have the desired effect in trying to reduce it from the MOPAC perspective?
I think we've got the right programmes, the right strategy. What we have got to do is to continue to prioritise it, which we are doing. Am I satisfied at the moment that we're having enough of an effect? Of course I can't be, because we are seeing such terrible incidents on the streets of London. I mean, I went to Camden last night in Kentish Town to their community conversation. Many residents from Kentish Town, from the Somali community, but across the community, were there to discuss what they wanted and what action they needed, and with the council as well as the police, to tackle the growing problem of knife crime and violence. And of course it's not just MOPAC, is it? It's the Metropolitan Police and the local authorities. We're investing, as I've said previously, we're investing in the services that need to be put in to support this. But it is very difficult because actually there's the enforcement and the police, and the focus is there from the Metropolitan Police, but in terms of having that longer term preventative effect on young people to help them steer them away from violence and propensity to violence, we need the services to be there children and adolescent mental health services are being cut. It is very difficult unless you are getting towards crisis to get a young person into therapy or to get the support services that they need. That's why we have called upon the government to step up, invest in those services, mental health services, youth services, across the piece, and to put that investment in. Otherwise, we are going to, whilst we can invest and we can have the priority, we are going to struggle to get on top of this. The police can't do it alone, we can't do it alone. The government needs to play its part as well.
Well, that was my next question. You said that there was a meeting with the Home Secretary and Police and Crime Commissioners last week, I think you said it was. What assistance has the government actually offered? I mean, you've obviously put forward the things that you think the government should be doing from what you've said, but what's come back from the government, apart from cuts in the police budget? What are they actually going to do to help?
It's not clear what they're going to do to help, because they certainly haven't reversed the cuts. They certainly haven't invested in the police. They're not investing in local authorities in terms of, we know, I think it's about 40% cut in London for local authorities. They're not investing in them, so they are having to, and it's not a criticism of local authorities, they are having to take really difficult decisions, cutting youth services, and the NHS is having to take difficult decisions around health services. We are yet to see anything significant coming out of the government around what they are going to do around tackling violence. And that, yes, absolutely is investment, but I also would like to see the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister leading and saying, this is what each of my departments of government of state are going to do, from the Home Office to the Ministry of Justice, CRC, probation. They need to step up and really get their act together in terms of tackling those offenders and helping making sure that they are no longer that risk to the community. Every part of government needs to step up as well as invest.
I'd like to take you to the next question, which is, you know, we're very much focused on the end, i.e. stopping it when the knives come, find the knives, prosecution, catching people. What are we doing to address the root cause of people getting involved in this in the first place?
I mean, in terms of what we are doing from City Hall and what the Metropolitan Police are doing, as well as London councils, I mean, some of the action plans that I have seen around knife crime, I mean, Lambeth, I think, either this week are publishing a really interesting strategic action plan, working with the police, working with voluntary sector around really embedding that public health approach around really looking at how do you prevent. And they are the type of services that I've talked about around ensuring there are the right services for when young people have been through trauma. There's a whole agenda around adverse childhood experiences to make sure that when children who have had difficult experiences which are going to impact on their behaviours and impact on the decisions that they take, and that those are supported, and where they can be, they are helped to overcome those experiences. Now, we are, and the Mayor is, through the Youth Fund and through Community Seed funding, putting extra money into that, but we need the government to actually also match that, because it's not enough at the moment, because it is putting extra investment in, but it's not making up, and we can't make up for the cuts. And it does matter, because those cuts are on services that young people really rely on to be able to be supported away from violence, away from difficult lives, and away from taking the wrong decisions and getting involved in crime.
Craig, do you want to add something on the root causes?
Well, gosh, I mean, the root causes, we could probably go on all day in terms of the root causes. I think it's the work, you know, at its basic level, it's the work we do with communities every day that helps around that. It's having good neighbourhood officers out there. It is having schools officers out there. It's having role models. There's a whole variety of things we need to do collectively to tackle this, of which our part is very much, we often talk about sort of in the 4Ps sense at the pursue end, but we have roles to do around prevention as well, and the wider protection piece. So absolutely clear we're part of that. And as the Deputy Mayor said, you look at some of and we spoke last month about the 4P plans that are coming out for each of the areas. There's some really quite sophisticated plans. But I think some of the lessons, and the Deputy Mayor and Commissioner and others have been looking at the Scotland violence stuff. The thing is, having a strategy, sticking to it and working through it for the long term. So I think that the essential ingredients are there. We've just got to keep driving away at it.
Okay, and Sophie, last issue from me is, what specific actions do you think MOPAC's going to be doing on knife crime over the next year?
We have got, we've got just, a table of specific actions that we will be undertaking over the next year. We are delivering the community seed funding, which we announced in terms of that. We are continuing with our campaign around London Needs You Alive and the campaigning materials around that. We will be extending the youth workers into more accident and emergency units. Not every accident and emergency unit, because we don't have the money to do that, but that will be extended. And we are also working around some of the community sentencing, around what would a good community sentence look like for young people, around electronic monitoring. We hope to be able to work with the Ministry. Well, we are working and discussing that with the Ministry of Justice around what that would look like. And one of the things that I'm very keen that we get out and will be got out shortly is, as part of that campaign from London Needs You Alive, is that toolkit for schools and for communities to use in working with young people and working with young people in sort of an educational way around enabling them and supporting them not to pick up the knife, and how do they really try to work their way through the issues that are leading them to violence.
Okay, thank you. Craig, perhaps we could have a note in due course about the rollout of the schools offices.
Thank you. Of course.
I've got figures of 106 schools are using knife wands at the moment, if that helps anyone.
Well, just to be clear, we have the figures for those schools which have asked for knife wands from us.
Yeah.
I know of quite a few schools that are already using knife wands and haven't asked from us. So those are just the figures of people that, because we're offering them, have taken them up. They're not necessarily the figures of how many head teachers are working with their schools officers to make sure that they, pupils aren't bringing knives into school. For example, at our Education Knife Crime Summit in October, we had a head teacher from Brent who was he won't have asked us for a knife one, but he regularly checks his pupils coming into school and makes sure that with a wand or with an arch, make sure that they are not carrying a knife. I know of other head teachers across the capital that are doing that.
Presumably the Met could find out which other schools are doing this, apart from with MOPAC support. If you've got the officers around, they can find out, and we could get a better Pan-London picture with and without MOPAC assistance.
Right, Unmesh.
Thank you, Chair. Sophie, if I could ask you this. The Mayor has asked each borough to have a knife crime action plan. Where are we with this in terms of the 32 boroughs?
So the knife crime action plans are led by the borough commander, and every borough has got an action plan now, and we are working, slowly, incrementally working to look at those plans and to talk to the boroughs around what it is, what are you doing, not in a sort of scrutinised ways, but let us know what you're doing. What can we do to help you? Where are the barriers? I've been having those discussions over the previous weeks around that when I talk to boroughs and have those meetings with boroughs. And we are also looking to increase the analytical capacity to ensure that actually those action plans are based on good, continue to be based on good practice, and that we can see where the outcomes are, the difference they are making.
Every borough has got action plan in place now. Okay. Secondly, I think you've been asked about this to you, Craig, dedicated schools officers. So just to clarify, because I've been asked this question at public meetings, these dedicated schools officers, are they specifically dedicated schools officers, or are they dedicated ward officers looking after schools?
They're dedicated schools officers. So I'll get you the numbers and the exact breakdown, so you know where the proposals are.
That would be really helpful.
Yeah.
And one last question, Chair, to you, Sophie, again. There was recently there was a Justice Matters event held in City Hall. I don't know if you were there, but the information gathered, what are your MOPAC planning to do with the information from that event?
The recent Justice Matters was on disproportionality in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
We will be publishing, we will put on the website what the actions are from that. We discussed, I'm trying to think about it, what we discussed was things around publication of the data, London-wide data from the Ministry of Justice. We pushed them for a firm commitment on that. I must say that the wording they used was it's almost an absolute firm commitment, which is not quite good enough. But we will publish, we will put on the website, and we can circulate to yourselves as members of the committee what the actions are coming out of that. But there'll be a transcript of it as well, because it is a public meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. We did ask at the previous meeting, Craig, I think, for copies of the borough's action plans. I mean, if you could just press a button when you get back to the office, push it out to the borough commanders, get them to ping it to us, that will keep us all very occupied for a period of time. If you don't mind doing that, that'll be fine. And on this subject, we will return again and again to this. This is seen, I think, by Londoners as the #1 issue at the moment. But part of this whole subset, of course, is child protection. Caroline, you've got a question.
I did just want to ask whether you could provide us with how you are spending the 1.4 million investment in A&E departments, so we can actually see which A&E departments will have youth workers, because I've been pushing for that. It says in our briefing it's the major trauma centres, they're already funded. It's how you get out to others where people come and with smaller injuries, where you might have that teachable moment and persuade them away.
Absolutely, we can do that. There's obviously the four major trauma centres. We are just taking the decisions at the moment about which other A&E departments it will be rolled out to, and that's why we haven't yet provided that
Definitely
information.
would like to see that.
But you're looking closely at Croydon University Hospital, I believe.
I'm sure,
I'll let that hang in the air.
Mayday
You are a very good constituency assembly
Special
member,
pleading,
Steve.
but special pleading in an area that is
Yeah.
well documented. Anyway, enough of that.
Yes.
It will be prioritised by obviously
Yes, of
where there
course.
is high crime and where there is footfall coming through the A&E where it's needed. So I don't know.
To pick up some of the other child protection issues, and since we last met, the latest HMI report has come out looking at child protection in the Met, their final sort of quarterly report. To both of you really, how do you feel reading that report, and are you satisfied with the progress that's being made?
No, I'm not satisfied with the progress that's been made, and when I read the report I feel frustrated by reading in it the fact that the outcomes for children hasn't shifted in the way it should have shifted. As you know, I've set up an Oversight Board group to look at this and to scrutinise the progress of the Metropolitan Police in responding to the HMIC report. However, although it is frustrating, there was within that report a number of positives around leadership, around structures, around direction of travel, but underlying that there is that we do need a step change in the outcomes for children, and that is certainly something that I am continued to scrutinise through the Oversight Group. There have been some good things put in place, and the HMIC does acknowledge that. It is complex, it is difficult, but we do need to make sure that there is that step change, and I know that's something that is absolutely shared by the Metropolitan Police and the Commissioner.
Because I mean, it's quite clear that though they say there has been some progress, consistently good outcomes in children in London are still not being achieved. 89% of cases they reviewed were judged as requiring improvement or were seen as inadequate. And, you know, if you look constantly throughout this report, and this is the latest quarter, it's not the first initial report, you know, it's slower, inconsistent progress, failures in partnership working, limited evidence of the MPS bringing about shared and consistent understanding of appropriate action, inconsistencies in investigations, absence of appropriate oversight, which we've been talking about here for years actually, the need for that supervision, the ratios there, the oversight, and gaps remain between the force's strategic intent to improve and its practice on the ground. So what I don't understand, you're frustrated, but your oversight board, how is it really delivering? Because it's clear that you've sort of got at a high level an idea of what needs to happen. The practice on the ground is not changing to reflect that. Either of you who would like to answer?
Shall I jump in? I don't think the practice isn't changing as fast as everyone wants it to change. The practice is changing. So I think you've got to be really clear here. This is a huge piece of change we're trying to implement. And whilst I'm all for phrases like step change, they're easy to write in a report. They're actually incredibly difficult to deliver with an organisation with 50,000 people. And to change every individual practice. If this was the only one we were trying to change, yes, I'd say we should have got far, far further, far, far quicker. But we're changing a whole lot of other pieces as well at the moment. So I think you've got to look at the detail in terms of some of those things. So yes, absolutely, 89%. But look how many of those relate to, did people actually fill the forms incorrectly, or did we change or alter an outcome for a young person? Because that's the bits I'm worried about. So some of it where you didn't complete Dash Form 6, in the nicest possible way, yes, that would be great when we get those done. but I'm worried about the ones where we change the risk profile for a young person. So of course we want to drive quicker and faster on these things, but I'm also realistic about how long it takes to do this in an organisation of our size. I think it's telling that HMIC are not coming back now in terms of this. It will be picked up as part of the next round of inspections. They're not continuing coming in every 3 months to look at progress against this. I don't take that as an endorsement, the job's done. Absolutely not. But I do take it as absolutely there are some of those things that are starting to have a real effect. I'm absolutely with the Deputy Mayor in terms of keeping that oversight, keeping that grip about this going. But I think there's at least another 9 months of work involved in that.
You did say they're planning to revisit the force at least once over the next 12 months to review progress, but they have said that they need to give you some time to try to implement this. But they are coming back. It's not...
but it's not. They're not coming back. I mean, bear in mind they've been back 4 times. This is not a structured programme of coming back all the time. This is something most of the police force are wrestling with.
In terms of, I mean, you've got things going on such as the reorganisation of you're integrating the Sexual Offences Exploitation Child Abuse Command into one command. You've had the changes at borough level, the borough mergers that are going on. One of the criticisms from the pilots was around safeguarding. Certainly Redbridge, I fed back to you that there were concerns about safeguarding and things slipping through.
In fairness, that's not the case now.
No. Right.
So, in fact, I've unless we've got different briefs, I've got a very different brief. So one of HMIC are saying one of the successes and one of their things that they think will give us strength for the future is that new model.
But on the ground, we had concerns raised from the initial borough pilots that safeguarding was slipping through. The Redbridge Safeguarding Board and others had raised concerns in the pilot. So
that's, I mean, in fairness, I will follow it up again for you. That's not what we're being fed back now.
But what do you expect to see? They'll come later this year, say it's in the autumn or something. They'll have given you time to embed these systems, trying to get it down to the front line. When they next come, what progress will you have made? Where do you expect to be?
So I expect in those areas where they go and look that if they've gone to the new BCU model, they'll see the new joint teams. They'll see new joint teams working in those areas. They'll see, hopefully, some consolidation of best practice around the safeguarding boards. So I think that's a real challenge for us. Something that HMIC will say to us almost, not quite off the record, but it is very hard working with 33 boards in London. Exactly the same question around consistency of practice that gets levelled rightly at the Metropolitan Police Service is writ large in a local government structure that has 33 boards in that place. So I think we'll see some of the best practice being picked up and driven through. You'll see greater awareness of officers, and with the availability of some different technology, you'll see some different reporting. So the ability of officers to do things on tablets, do risk assessments at the scene, you'll see some of that work changing. That's what I expect to see. So I think you'll see a continuing steady progress against those expectations we're judged against.
Okay, so we need to monitor it against those things you've said. Sophie, your Oversight Board, is that going to continue meeting every 6 weeks?
Yes, we are continuing meeting. In fact, we're meeting tomorrow, and that will continue to have that scrutiny and oversight. We have one of the things the Oversight Board has done and pushed for is the performance measures around, well, yes, it does take a long time, and I accept that from, it is, these things can't change overnight, but actually what should we expect to see and how can we assess that progress that you should expect at this stage has happened. But yeah, absolutely, we've got that Oversight Board.
HMI are part of that now?
The HMI are part of that, as are the College of Policing and the Chief Police Councils, which I think is a real, I think is really important because it means that we have that understanding from across the country around what can work around child protection. And that the Oversight Board has been, and we have a representative from the local authority on that, because as you'll know, the HMIC report also talked about young people in custody and what the issues are around the young people in custody. And the Court of Full report did praise the work that has happened around looking at how do you deal and how do you make sure that young people aren't kept in custody. Obviously that's a local authority, very much part of the local authority issues, because they have the duty and the responsibility around providing alternative accommodation. Yes, the police have to make sure they've assessed it, logged it, asked for it, but actually there is a significant problem in London about that alternative accommodation just not being available.
In terms of picking up on custody, your comment earlier, Craig, was kind of saying, well, some of these, when you delve down, are actually, they didn't fill in the right form. But one of the case studies in this report relates to custody, where a child had felt suicidal. An officer entered his cell, found him with a T-shirt around his neck, and yet the paperwork that was filled out, the pre-release risk assessment, said he was fit and well for transfer to court, and there was no mention of the child's mental health problems or attempts to self-harm. They just were not recorded anywhere.
That's wrong.
I mean,
That's wrong,
though
absolutely.
form filling is one thing, that's...
Form filling,
But
no,
real
I'm
risk.
absolutely clear. But there are different types of... So some of those fails will be... and we've discussed this before. Some of the proliferary of reporting and risk assessing drives a pattern of behaviour that's not always beneficial in terms of outcome. So you take this scenario of interfamilial allegations, children, sibling. There is a huge amount of reporting now over things that, quite frankly, we should not be getting involved in and getting reporting on. Fighting over remote controls, fighting over PlayStations. They require the same level of reporting as the more serious end. We need, as a service, and that's the work we do with the college and others, to get a more proportionate approach.
Okay, and then obviously you're moving to this new BCU structure. Are you confident it's not going to further complicate the arrangements to keep young people and children safe? Okay, we'll hold you to that. Now, one of the issues that we raised 2 weeks ago when we looked at custody and healthcare was the issue around appropriate adults. And it's a very big issue that was raised with us through our round table and some of our other work, that there aren't enough appropriate adults, which can therefore delay things in custody and so on. Whilst we understand it is a borough matter, we felt it would be very beneficial for MOPAC to lead a sort of recruitment campaign, maybe calling it something other than appropriate adults, to try and recruit people into that kind of volunteering role that could help make things quicker and speedier and better for children in custody. Is this something you will be taking up, Sophie?
In terms of the appropriate adult, I'm going to take advice from the group that the Met have set up to look at this, and was praised in the last Q4 report around custody and appropriate adult. I mean, the review actually said it represents a significant step towards establishing the necessary strategic collaborative links between the force and local authorities to enable them to meet their statutory obligations. That includes appropriate adult. If there is an issue that needs to be around recruitment, and it is, we can help, absolutely will help. But I think that's a question that I need to ask that group, and I will be asking that group through the Oversight Board tomorrow, around what can we do to help? Is this about recruitment? Can we help? And what is the best way of doing that?
Well, the latest report clearly says the force has made little progress to improve the provision of appropriate adult services for children in custody, and found local safeguarding agencies were not aware of these problems. We think whether it also links to independent custody visitors and all that, you could do a general volunteering campaign to help find people, if they're then put into contact with the boroughs, to make sure we've got enough people in place to make that experience in police custody as pain-free as possible for those children and young people.
I'm not suggesting at all that there isn't a problem, there isn't an issue. What I'm trying to say is that there is a group that is specifically looking at this, and that has the local authorities, as representatives of the local authorities on it, working with the Metropolitan Police. If those representatives say to us, what we need is a recruitment campaign, and we can help, absolutely we can help. We've got to work out the best way of getting, if it's about recruitment, and best way of doing that. I'm absolutely open to doing that. But I think, in terms of my role, I need to ask that group, in which I will be doing through the Oversight Board, to say, what can we do to help? What are the barriers? And then we take it from there. If it's a recruitment campaign, yes, of course we would do it.
We will come back to that.
On that point, you will be receiving a letter from me recommending, amongst other things, MOPAC support for the recruitment campaign as part of the work that we've just been leading on. So that will kind of focus you on that particular point. As soon as you've got
That
one...
includes vulnerable adults as well.
We have the action, don't worry, Andrew. Right. Yeah,
Include
vulnerable
adults.
vulnerable
Vulnerable
adults,
adults,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
no, absolutely.
Wait for the letter, it'll all be within there. Susan?
Very quick question, please. Given the latest information on the sex abuse gangs in Telford and the previous ones in Rotherham, so grooming gangs, what are the likelihood of us having those in London?
I think that's almost an impossible question to answer for you.
It's of concern, clearly.
Oh no,
these are
I think to everyone, you know, that you see the reporting of some of those sorts of things. This is what these processes, this is what these systems were designed to uncover. I think the experience of those that have been uncovered in the past is sometimes these systems don't uncover this. So I don't think anyone can ever be complacent about the sort of issues you touched on. I think we can put the processes in place, we can do the systems, we can work with all the partners across London. You can never be complacent and never say never.
And indeed, we're not complacent.
No.
It is a question that I pose at the Oversight Group regularly to Martin Hewitt around. We have had these scandals outside of London. London is huge.
Yeah.
How do we know that this is not happening in London at the moment? And it isn't complacent.
Yeah.
There isn't the evidence to suggest it is, but it is not. It is something that I've spoken to the Commissioner about. I've spoken to Assistant Commissioner Martin Hewitt about through the Oversight Group to say we've got to keep challenging ourselves to make sure we're looking for this, not just waiting for it. And that is absolutely what is happening.
Okay, thank you.
Right, the next subject matter as one of the 5 priorities is standing together against hatred, intolerance and extremism. Some of the measures that we have aren't over clear if we're going in which direction, but Unmesh, you've got a few questions.
Yes, sir. Thank you. If I could start off with you, Craig, first. So we are seeing more reports of hate crime and an increasing sanction detection rate. So what's behind this? And again, just to qualify the caveat that Andrew referred to when we were talking about knives found in schools, is it a case of hate crime actually going up, or is it better reporting, or a combination of both?
I think it is a combination of both, and I think, and for the benefit of brevity for you, I'll give you some of the figures I've got separately, so you've got them into. So I think it's different across the different strands of hate crime, but I also think we're seeing some of the bedding in and delivery of things like the hate crime liaison officers, the detective inspectors in the CSUs, the community safety units. Some of that work is now starting to pay dividends. We're about 18 months, 2 years into the bedding in of those. This has certainly led to both more reporting. As you know, we work with groups like True Vision, Tell Mama, the CST. So we're getting more and more information coming to us in terms of what's going on. And then I think also there is an understanding throughout the criminal justice process about the significance and impact of these sorts of offences. So I think that's what's leading to those increases in sanction detection rates. But the sanction detection rates, and you'll see it when you see the data, are in specific strands of this crime, not the totality.
So in light of that, and this is a question to you, Craig, and to you, Sophia, as well, why do you think we are seeing a falling level of satisfaction from hate crime victims? I mean, you're doing a lot of work, you've got the online hub.
Yeah, no,
stuff like that.
Gosh, I don't know. I've not seen the detailed research in terms of the satisfaction, so I don't know whether there's an issue between outcomes and expectations. So it's very, very hard to answer that one without some research. I've not got any of you.
The briefing note that I have refers to, just consider victim satisfaction has fallen, admittedly slightly, from 73% in the year to December 2016 to 70% in December 2017. So slight drop, but nonetheless a drop.
Yeah, I was going to say we are doing quite a bit of work at the moment on victim satisfaction to try and understand it. But by all means, we'll take that one away.
We are. There's a significant piece
Yeah.
of work because through the Oversight Board we look at victim satisfaction. They're not the child protection one, but the Oversight Board. We are looking at victim satisfaction. There is a significant piece of work being undertaken between MOPAC and the Met around looking and deep diving into what is driving victim satisfaction, what are the issues, and how do you actually increase it? Because it's also very inconsistent across London boroughs. Some boroughs are doing very well on, it's very inconsistent. We're looking at what the reasons are, where boroughs are doing it well, how do you spread that good practice, and what it is that's really driving good victim satisfaction. It is a really significant piece of work that I'm expecting to come back to the Oversight Board in the next Oversight Board.
Now, I give you credit for taking some particular initiatives like the online hub. I mean, how's that working?
The online hub has dealt with over 500 cases. It's dealt with over 500 cases since March of last year when it was launched. And it has, not just in terms of the cases, sort of looking into it in terms of investigation, but it's 299 victims have had their support through the hub, because it was about investigation, but it was also about ensuring that victims get support. So it's early days in terms of prosecutions. There's been 3 successful criminal prosecutions coming out of the online hate crime hub. It's early days, and I would hope to see some of the cases that have been dealt with converting into prosecutions, and for that to increase to increase, and that's what we'd like to see over the next years, as well as that victim support being improved and the numbers being improved as well.
If I could come to you again, please, Sophie, actually. Craig talked about different different categories of hate crime. So on the 6th of March, the Home Affairs Select Committee met to discuss hate crime and its violent consequences, and they found that across England, only 7% of hate crimes led to a prosecution, and only 6% led to a conviction. They also found discrepancies between different categories of hate crime. For example, prosecution for disability hate crime was significantly lower than for other categories. So I want to ask you about this particular category of hate crime, something that Tom Copley, my colleague, raised with the Mayor and the Commissioner in December in relation to the potential underreporting of this disability hate crime. Would MOPAC be willing to look more closely at both the potential underreporting of disability hate crime and at any discrepancies between prosecution rates for all hate crimes?
Yes, and we do, and you're absolutely right. The number of reports of disability hate crime has decreased, and has decreased quite significantly. And it's certainly something we have also we've scrutinised through the Oversight Board around why is that, what has happened, and how do you improve that reporting of disability hate crime. It is of concern there, and you're absolutely right. I'm sure the Home Affairs Select Committee was looking at it nationally, but there are differences between detection rates and prosecutions as well, depending on the type of hate crime. There has been some slight improvements in some areas, for example, and it is only slight, around Islamophobic offences, but we are seeing a drop overall in detection around hate crime.
Can I ask you, before I move on to my next question, which is about countering violent extremism, both you, Craig and Sophie, where is your thinking on gender-based hate crime and recording of it, following the lead set by Nottinghamshire and 2 other forces? Now, to be fair, Craig, the Commissioner, when I asked her this question, I think before Christmas, she was quite sceptical about this particular sort of category of hate crime. But so I don't want to put you on the spot, but perhaps, Sophie, if you could give me your thoughts, because from memory, when I put this question to the Mayor last year at MQT, he said he would be looking into it. This was about actually over a year ago, in sometime in 2016. I mean, are MOPAC still looking at it, or looking at how it's working in Nottinghamshire and the other 2 forces?
There is a review of the Nottinghamshire of how categorising misogyny as a hate crime is what they've done in Nottinghamshire, and I think Avon and Somerset have just taken it up as well. There is a review of that being undertaken at the moment, not by ourselves, but by Nottinghamshire themselves, and I think they are producing a paper to go to the Chiefs Council around what that has shown. So when we see that, it's something that we'll be looking at and discussing with the Commissioner around what does that mean for London, what does it show, what added value would it bring to London, and you know what the possible next steps might be. But it is a review that's been undertaken
Still on the
outside.
agenda.
Yeah, it's on the. As we said in the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, we will look at the review.
Right. Okay, and my final question is to you, Sophie. In terms of the Countering Violent Extremism program, and I think the Mayor is putting £400,000 into this scheme, what are you hoping to achieve in the next year? And in particular, how will you measure the success of your work in terms of preventing extremism?
So you're right, absolutely right, we're investing in a programme of work around countering violent extremism. In the next year, what we hope to achieve is to look at to have engaged with communities, engaged with those who are particularly affected by violent extremism, and I don't just mean so-called Islamic extremism. Absolutely, right-wing extremism is on the agenda, and we need to tackle that as well. What the outcome of that should be that we will understand what needs to be done better in London to counter violent extremism, how we can support across London those programmes and projects that are countering violent extremism, support communities, support families, and support the statutory agencies to do so. And part of that is to be working with the Home Office, because as you know, the Prevent Agenda is a national programme. So it is to how do we strategically within London have ensure that we're adding value to the Prevent Agenda and improving the delivery of that, and whether we need to be doing our own commissioning around that is something that we'll have to look at as well.
The funding stream here, if I'm right, are we encouraging community groups and councils to apply for this money?
We don't have a funding stream.
The £400,000.
The 400,000, the money, that is for the programme of work that is going to take place in engaging with communities, analysing what is happening, and producing an action plan around that.
Just to finish up, I mean, from memory again, I think the Mayor put great emphasis on learning from some of the lessons of Prevent, which is still the only show in town, for all its faults or perceived faults. Put emphasis on actually targeting this particular pot of money to groups working on the ground, community groups, women's groups, and so on. And so that was the question. Will they be encouraged to apply?
So at the moment, what we are doing is we're doing a programme of work to engage with communities that are affected by violent extremism, and that programme of work will absolutely. And I am very keen to make sure that we are talking to women and talking to, in terms of their incredibly important role. That programme of work is starting and will be hopefully finished in the next year. From that, we will know what we need to do in terms of programmes. If there are early indications, we'll put them into practice. But from that, we will be looking at, well, do we need to do some strategic commissioning? Not necessarily from MOPAC. This is a City Hall agenda, because it's very much around, the Mayor is leading it, but with myself and Matthew Ryder. So we need to look at what does this mean around community cohesion and social integration. The programme of work is happening now to provide what are the parameters and what actions need to be taken.
Yeah. We've got a couple more questions around the subject. Before I bring in Tony first, I mean, it's a complex arena, just trying to understand the increase, because the figures I've got on an increase of 3% in the year 17 compared to 18 on encouraging more victims to come forward. And then the sub-note I got is that it's dangerous to add up all the hate crime categories, because that can result in double counting, as more than one offence can be flagged. So it's clearly a complex area. Tony, you wanted to pursue that, did you?
Yes, initial questions to Sophie. In response to Unmesh, you said that in relation to the reporting on the online hate crime hub, I think you said that there were many hundreds of crimes referred to this. Can you repeat the figure? I had a feeling you said there were 500 either in March or up to March. What was the precise number?
Had 567 cases referred to the online hate crime hub since March 2017. Yes.
Okay. Can you and you said that there were very few prosecutions. Are you able to tell me how many of these reported cases led to anybody being charged?
I haven't got the charge rate in terms of successful criminal prosecutions. We've had 3.
3 out of...
3 out of 567 cases, but I also said that the Online Hate Crime Hub, yes, absolutely was set up to investigate online hate, but it was also set up to ensure that victims of online hate get the support, and 299 victims have been referred to specialist victim support who would not have done otherwise.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. My understanding is that in response to the setting up of the hub, you have some dedicated police officers who presumably run some kind of triage process on this. Do correct me if I'm wrong. And if they believe that original sifting there actually is something which should be investigated, the matter goes to boroughs. Is that right?
It would go to wherever was appropriate.
Okay.
But
the characters the full-time, and these are presumably warranted police officers who are dealing with the hub, they are, it would be correct to say that their function is triage.
Predominantly. Well, triage and support.
Okay, triage and support. Are you able, because you can clearly work out how much time the dedicated police officers are spending on this, are you able to give any estimate of how much time has been spent on the cases which have been referred to boroughs?
No, I haven't got that level of detail. I can't even tell you from the 567 cases how many are crimes.
Well, of course.
So I haven't got that data. I can see if we've got it.
Thank you for that, Deputy. I'm leading up to this one. But it is likely to be many thousands of hours, police hours, have been spent on looking at these 500 matters which were referred through the hub.
I genuinely don't know.
But it is likely.
Well, I don't know how many. In fairness, I don't know how many of the cases met the threshold to be recorded as a crime and went out for further investigation. I could get you all of that detail. It would be wrong for me to guess.
Common sense tells us that when these matters are reported online, somebody is spending some time looking at them, deciding to whom they should be referred, and there are the processes of bureaucracy. But
I do emphasise again, these are 567 cases.
Yes.
I don't know the next figure. So that it might only be we've had 10 crimes. I'll make it up. That's going to be a very small amount of work. It might be 250 crimes.
Right.
So without that other figure, I'm probably going to hide.
That leads me very nicely, really, to the meat of my question. On the Met's website yesterday, it said, if somebody does something that isn't a criminal offence, but the victim or anyone else believes it was motivated by prejudice or hate, we would class it as a hate incident. Though what the perpetrator has done may not be against the law, their reasons for doing it are. This means it may be possible to charge them with an offence. Are you familiar with that statement which appeared on your website yesterday?
It's been amended, yes.
All right. Well, firstly, because I'm really rather simple as far as these matters are concerned, could you explain to me how someone could conceivably be prosecuted when an offence hasn't taken place?
There can't be. So, as I said, it's been amended. This is a new definition. It's based on a College of Policing authorised professional practice. The offence carried out must be a criminal offence. Otherwise, it goes without saying you can't be prosecuted.
How do you account for this appearing on your website?
It's come as part of a piece of work that's been done nationally about an authorised professional practice.
That's the amendment.
Yeah.
That's the new amendment.
Yeah.
I think it's that bit that's the problem.
Would you say, and I'm looking at this charitably, would you say that the reason you put this on your website, even though it has been subsequently amended, was to increase reporting?
I have no idea in relation to the rationale for why that bit of a very large website was there. I'll find out for you.
Yes. The reason I ask, and it goes to the point that I made originally. Large amounts, I suspect, and you said you're going to be able to give me the actual figures, but common sense suggests, let's say, of the 200 odd people, separate people who reported these things, let's say 3 hours was spent on them, and I think that probably is an underestimate when the thing has been fed out. It's led only to 3 prosecutions. One wonders whether or not that money well spent and shortage of police resources are well spent. I would find it very difficult, and I suspect if you were speaking, either of you were speaking at a meeting in one or other of the boroughs in my constituency, and a shopkeeper stood up and said, I have frequently had stuff shoplifted from my shop, £150 a time, and you, the police, have done nothing when manifestly a real crime has taken place, and yet you are encouraging people to report matters which may not be offences at all. How would you answer that?
Well, I would answer it on the lines of, so a lot of what we've been talking about this morning are real crimes. I'll take you up to North London. Go and speak to some of the local communities in North London. Talk about the impact of anti-Semitic offences, and try and talk about the impact some of these allegations and some of these alleged crimes have on people. I think you've got to be really careful, personal view, getting into sort of moral equivalence about one crime's more important than another one.
It's not a question.
I really do think this is somewhere we've got to be really. We started talking about hate crime, where people have crimes reported against them because of what they look like, their sexual orientation, their origin. I think we've got to be really careful saying somehow we shouldn't encourage people to. So what you're saying, we shouldn't encourage people to tell us this?
I'm not asking you about moral equivalence at all. I am talking about the people who pay their taxes for a police service, who say, here is a real crime which has been committed against me as a citizen. The police are not taking any action on this matter. How do you justify money being spent on, or rather no money being spent on a real crime which has been committed against me as against crimes which may not have been committed at all?
I've been really clear in relation to if there's no crime committed, there's no investigation. You can't investigate and prosecute someone when there is no crime committed. You know, and we've discussed this numerous times in this room, we triage and have triaged investigations since I started in policing 34 years ago.
Nobody's objecting about the process. Nobody is objecting to the seriousness. And I take your point entirely about moral equivalence. But there is a feeling that you may well be encouraging, and you know, and it may well have been an error, you putting this thing up on your website, encouraging people to report matters which aren't crimes. I would find it impossible if my next door neighbour, and indeed it happened, was burgled, and the police simply came round and said, well, really, there isn't a lot we can do about it. It really, really is hard. We're in the front line as politicians, having to deal with these things. And so I come to you in all innocence, saying, how do I defend this? It really is hard.
But those difficult, we've had this debate in this room over the last 4 or 5 years collectively about those difficult choices you make. So the pot of volume that comes in at the front end, many of which is not crime. So do we stop doing the doubling in the last 8 years of missing people? Should we stop that and do those shoplifting offences? We won't look for missing people. These are all difficult choices. Now, we can either comment on these difficult choices from afar, or we can get down and get involved in making some of those difficult choices.
Well, I
would just like to say something about your line of questioning, because I actually find it really concerning that you are suggesting that where there are crimes taking place online, it is very difficult to defend the police investigating that. We know there is significant harm being perpetrated, especially to women, to ethnic minorities, to the disabled, people living with disabilities, online, and it is absolutely right that we have an online hate crime hub that has been set up with a specific purpose, with 3 purposes that you are oversimplifying. 1, yes, to investigate crimes. 2, to support victims. Incredibly important, because we know that the harm that is taking place online to victims of hate crime is significant and deeply concerning. And 3, to work with social media companies to bring material online. I find it really concerning.
Deputy Mayor, that's not the point that was made by Tony Arbour. That's clearly not the point. That was let me just all calm down for a moment. That was not the point made by sorry, with respect, that was not the point made by Tony. Craig answered the point made by Tony Arbour. Whether we agree or disagree is another thing. I think what comes to the
question, how do I defend the police investigating online hate crime?
No,
you defend it because there is significant harm taking place online.
We don't normally behave like this in this committee, so please.
Well, I'm sorry, but I find it really troubling.
If you could permit me just to bring this forward, because we're doing so well on time and we all get on famously. The fact is, it's a very fair point about we have criminal offences, hate crime offences, domestic violence offences, and incidents. So hate crime incidents, domestic violence incidents. Now, incidents, which we pursued in a conversation, may or may not be a crime. And there is that issue that you put on the website, and I think that's worth pursuing. And I think the difference between offences and incidents is something that this committee will take an interest in. Fact. Right, now, moving it on, but Andrew, briefly.
Yeah, well, I think we've got the next round of questions anyway.
Well, I saw hang on, before we...
Okay, well,
on this subject,
I don't know if it's going to be helpful or not, but I hope it will be. When I was at law school many years ago, we're looking at crime. A crime has 2 elements, the actus reus and the mens rea. And what I think most people don't know is that there are 2 elements to any crime. So if people are reporting things, they may think it's been a crime, but actually it isn't, because there's a mens rea but no actus reus. So what you're doing, it seems to me, is taking all this lot in and then yourselves sorting out whether in fact there's a crime or not. And that seems to be a perfect thing to do.
That's what policing
and that's what you do on all offences.
Right. I think I heard Craig say it. Right, sorry, now, Caroline and then Sean and then next.
Yeah, I had a question. I understand over the past 2 years, MOPAC has been supporting a trial of Self-Evident, which is an app for reporting particularly hate crimes, but I think other crimes have been reported through it. I think you've done a review of how successful it's been. I think last December, the support it's given to vulnerable victims, how successful it's been going right through to the court process. Is that likely to be published so that we can see it and see whether this might be a way forward for reporting such crimes and making it easier?
Let me look into... we have been supporting the reporting of hate crime via that app. I haven't seen the review of it, but obviously if we have reviewed it, we should be publishing the results of that, and I'm very happy to share it.
I'm told it was in December you produced a report on it, so it would be really helpful if we could see that, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, fine. Great, we're now going to move to the last set of questions. Now, this is around volume crime. Now, clearly, the previous administration gave an emphasis, shall we say, on neighbourhood volume crime, and fair enough, we've moved away to a different performance regime, which is legitimate. But we are conscious that volume crime is massively important, is the crimes that are experienced by many Londoners in their neighbourhood. And we wanted to really focus on performance on volume crime, which some of the measures certainly appear to be definitely going in the wrong direction. Andrew.
Yes, Craig. We know that each borough's had to select 2 of their own volume crimes as a local priority. What difference is that making to the dedicated ward officers or other officers on the boroughs? What are they doing differently if something is a local priority compared to ordinary police work?
So a variety of things across the borough. So let's take a real life example. We were out in Enfield yesterday talking to some of the teams out there where they're working around things like burglary, as one of the local priorities. So as you say, what we've got is a range of local priorities for each and every borough. What's happened, and we spoke at the last meeting around the 2 dedicated ward officers and then the ability for the boroughs to have some resource above it. If you take a borough like the one we were on yesterday, it's about 10 to 12 people that they can flex around local priorities above and beyond their 2 dedicated ward officers, their robbery squads and other capabilities to meet some of those priorities and look at them. We're doing okay on some local priorities, so about 16 are showing a reduction, but that's out of 68. Overwhelmingly, a lot of the local priorities are going up.
Yeah, well, we've got the chart here, and Pan London, the only thing that's come down is theft taking of motor vehicles by 1.6%,
yeah,
which equates to a drop of a benefit of 6 offences. So most of them are going the wrong direction. In Camden, common assault's up 22%, and theft from person up 149.2%, which is probably moped crime.
It is.
And in Barnet, we've
predominantly.
seen burglary up 18.7% in my constituency. So
yeah.
burglary's been a priority in Barnet for as long as I can possibly remember, under whichever regime it happens to be.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to be making much difference. I think we've gone up from bottom to third from bottom in terms of the league table, from what the borough commander told me. So is actually making some of your local priority actually making a difference if, when we see the figures, it doesn't even make any difference at all?
Well, so in terms of focus, yes, but does it feed through yet into figures?
Outcomes, what, you know?
Oh, no, outcomes, no, absolutely. But if you do, I mean, almost implicit in your argument is don't have them. You know, the reality is that focus is there for both the local borough or the BCU, and it is also there for the community safety partnership and the work they're doing in terms of those sorts of pieces of work. So it's absolutely right that we give that flexibility to allow local priority. Otherwise, you end up with a scenario where, I don't know, we set 4 priorities at the centre and say that's it for everyone in London. You know as well as I do, the 32 London boroughs look and feel very, very different.
Yeah, well, fine, but you're asked at the beginning about confidence in the Met, and if people know that these are local priorities in a particular borough, yet all they see is the figures in the red, what does that do for confidence?
But that's why, no, I'm really, so you're almost reinforcing the don't ever set a target for anything, because if it goes red, it's bad. If it goes green, it's good. Life is never as simple and as straightforward as that, sadly. So absolutely, we want them to come down, but at times, you know, we're seeing a national burglary trend that's going up. You know, the Metropolitan Police has the highest burglary detection rate of the large city forces in the UK. So in terms of the...
What's the percentage?
It's about 6 point something. So it's still low, but that's high compared to the rest of the peers and country. I want a better sanction detection.
When I looked at that before, a couple of years ago, the actual number that ended up as SDRs was about 2%. People were actually convicted at the end.
Right, so it's about 5. I haven't got the figure exactly. It's between 5 and 6 the last time. So in terms of those bits, those are the bits I want to drive on. So the other bit I disaggregate from the burglary figures, and the Deputy Mayor and I have this quite a bit, is we've changed the definition of burglary this year. So there's a new definition of burglary. So burglary's gone up, depending on which figures you look at. I think we agree it's somewhere between 8 and 10%. Burglary will have gone up across the piece because now a shed is a burglary. It wasn't recorded as a burglary last year.
It's gone up 17% across the piece.
No, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. So 8 or 10% of that is come around because we changed the category of it. No, we've got work to do about burglary. Absolutely clear on that.
But okay, you changed everything on burglary, but what about the other ones? You know, theft from person in Camden. I mean, that's presumably, I'd say, is moped crime.
A lot of that is moped crime, where we started to see the moped crime come down. Yes. Yeah. So theft of powered two-wheelers started in about August, September last year to see that start to peak.
Well, we will monitor that one further because that's not what the figures show anyway.
Well, no, sorry, that's not what that indicator showed. If you look at theft of powered two-wheelers and you look at some of the moped crime figures, particularly for the last quarter, you will see that started to peak.
I mean, basically what I'm asking is what evidence is there that the local volume priorities are actually making a difference?
Well, if you go, but you can't look at a Met-wide level and say that you've got to go to individual boroughs, individual teams, look at what they're doing, talk as you do to people in your local authority that you're working with. What are they doing around burglary? Are they working with the borough in relation to the work around that? What are they doing about common assault? Because we're coming up to a point where we'll start to consider whether some of these need reviewing.
Well, against the background of all these rising figures, I mean, what does success actually look like for you?
Success for me looks like a real step change improvement in terms of either the crime starting to fall or you're increasing the people brought to justice for them. If you can do both, great.
That's not happening at the moment.
It's not.
Yeah, okay. I mean, ideally, I suppose we stop talking about these as volume crime.
Oh gosh,
but that's a long way to go.
No, well, no, but this is part of the challenge. If you look, so you've got to take burglary over a longer history. We've been through one of the lowest periods of burglary in London in our recent history over the last 3 or 4 years in terms of where we go. Burglary has ticked back up across the country, and London is no different in terms of that.
Did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of just picking up on what Craig said in terms of burglary, increases in the Met across the Met were 4%. Across England and Wales, it's been 8%. So it's going back to what we discussed at the beginning, that yes, crime is reported crime is rising in London, but it is rising at a slower rate than it is in the rest of England and Wales. And that's the same for, if you look at, I'm just looking down, I've got the burglary figures, 4% Met, 8% across England and Wales. Yeah. In terms of what the priorities, having a priority has done for a local area, that's certainly something we have been looking into and we are discussing and asking local authorities and the local police around. We have really good examples of how that focus that Craig talks about has started to make a difference. You know, Wandsworth, for example, had theft of motor vehicle as its local priority, and it worked with the local authority, did some brilliant work around moped theft, and it did see, for Wandsworth, it did see that start to fall.
0.7%, 26 offences.
Well, it's still there. But we've also done an analysis across the Met around what, you know, just looking at the figures, what does it mean having a local priority? And it can show that actually in terms of across the piece, apart from burglary, where it's about it's the rest of the NPS, it's a little bit different. But actually where there has been a local priority, you have seen a different rate of increase or a fall compared to the rest of the NPS. So if you take...
Hang on a minute. If you take burglary, you said that it's 4% drop in the increase in the Met. But if you look at the boroughs where it's been made a priority, it's 17.3%. Granted,
except for burglary, that's what I said. I did say except. And of course, let's also understand why the local priorities were chosen. It is because it was a particular problem in that particular area. And burglary actually was chosen by 23 boroughs because it is an issue and continues to be an issue in London but across England and Wales as well.
Can I just say, you're also, those figures are total burglary. So you might be talking about residential burglary and total burglary. There'll be slightly different figures.
Okay. Do the borough set burglary as a target or residential burglary?
The way it's reported is total burglary.
But the local priorities, I thought, were
residential.
Residential. So
it might be where there are two different. Just being very careful on the figures.
Well, I think it might be helpful if we have the split for the similar period, so we can do a proper comparison. I mean, the last issue I want to, I mean, obviously this is a major issue as is going on. When the borough mergers roll out, are we still going to get separate borough figures on the local priorities? It's not going to be merged into 2s and 3s?
No.
Yeah, but that is, to me, very important. I mean, as Andrew has investigated the figures, and we've got in front of us, colleagues, we needed it. We've got in front of us the priority figures that are requested by the boroughs, but of course behind those are the local crimes that aren't priority figures. So there may be potentially today perhaps a kind of blind spot around that. I was a bit disturbed about your point, Craig, about red bad, green good. We're moving away from that.
No,
I kind of heard that, and I'm sure I misheard.
To reassure, so it was a response to the question. So a crime goes down 6 felt like it wasn't good enough. One of the challenges with this, and you'll know this for anyone who's watched crime figures over a period of time, you can get false confidence from green, and you can get false worries from red. So most people now with data like this at this sort of volume do things like 1 and 2 standard deviations to ensure that the trend is absolutely real. And you'll know we've become far more cautious about saying how great things are based on 1 month's data. You look for longer term trends. That's the only point I made in relation to red,
but
red and green.
For those of us, and I think most of us around here, either go to safe neighbourhood boards or ward panels. So I'm thinking in terms of the public of Londoners, how they understand. And they've been used to holding their local teams to account simply around red and green and burglary and robbery and motor vehicle crime. And we don't want to move away from that. We don't want the pendulum to move away from that, because they are the neighbourhood crimes that are very important to local people. And with our move to perhaps sophistication of targeting, we need some clarity so that local people at ward panels and boards can hold their local officers to account. And that's something that I think is very important to us. Last couple of questions really for me on the back of that is, you've got the local priorities, or one question around local priorities. Go back to ward panels, I keep banging on about that. We're still setting local priorities and promises. And we had this in the past, remember, the previous administration. How do we handle it when those local promises, priorities are contrary to the borough priorities? Have you any experience of that, or do we just handle that locally and that's kind of okay?
My experience is it's usually handled locally.
It kind of works.
It's hard to envisage a scenario where at a very localised area, if it's a localised area, it's usually about a premises or a particular problem, i.e. a hotspot. I've not seen it where someone says at a local area we'll tackle a completely new crime to something everyone else is looking at.
In fairness, we did have that in the past where local officers will sometimes say this is not one of what we can do because from the centre we're supposed to do this. But I think we've grown up through that.
I think.
Okay. Really, I mean, Deputy Mayor, I mean, on those boroughs that are not performing, and already we see 1 year in, there's poor performance and by the boroughs. And we'll be holding you and the Mayor and Craig to account 1 year on these figures. How are you holding those boroughs to account? They've set their priorities a year ago. They're going in the wrong direction. What's the sort of mechanism whereby you're talking to borough commanders and others? How is that working? Is that through usual performance management? How do you do that?
So in a variety of ways. So a real example, yesterday, as I said, out in a borough in North London, it is those conversations. How are you doing against your priorities? What are the issues that are affecting it? What can you do differently in terms of being able to do it? So that's the sort of what I would call the informal way. There's then through the line management of territorial policing. So remember, you've got Martin Hewitt, Mark Simmons and others talking to borough commanders. What are you doing against your overall performance? Where are you against that? We've got dashboards, as you know, and I think we've shared some of those with you before, where we can, if we want to, I can literally open up my iPhone and have a look at that now in terms of current performance against it. So you can do it at that level, and then through our crime fighters process. So there's a process that drives it through in terms of looking at the information and what's going on.
Deputy Mayor, I think I heard talk about potential refreshing of local priorities. So they've been set. It was a big piece of work. I know you went out to many of the boroughs, had the conversations, widely or not so widely, which is fine. A year on or so, how about reviewing and refreshing priorities? What's the mechanism? Is there a mechanism for that?
Yes, there is. We are in the process of reviewing and refreshing the priorities. We have written out to all the borough commanders and the local authorities with the same the data pack, the refreshed data pack that we sent out last time around what does the data crunching show us that's happening in your borough. Does that make sense to you? I have had a number of discussions with the borough commander and with Mark Simmons as well, with local authorities. That's a rolling programme. Some of them we are refreshing via correspondence, some of them we're refreshing by meetings, but during the course of this year I expect to have met with every borough commander and every local authority lead to talk to them about their local priorities, have that oversight and scrutiny around what the performance looked like, and to have that understanding around what difference that has made in terms of, you know, proactivity and what is happening on the ground. That has started, but we will refresh the local priorities and they'll be published in May.
You'd have a say in that while you're performance managing those boroughs.
Well, I'm not performance managing them.
While you're sometimes feels like that.
Yeah.
Okay, but while you're performance managing Craig and he's performance managing the boroughs or the borough partnerships, clearly those that aren't performing on certain priority areas, you would probably say you need to concentrate on those. And
Absolutely.
I think that's
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I think we're probably where we are on that. Clearly, we'll be looking at this continuing on. This 1 year under the plan. We will continue to review it and hold you both, particularly you, Deputy Mayor, to account. That takes us nicely to, thank you for that Q&A. Can colleagues kindly note the report from MOPAC and the answers today from the deputies. Item 6, work programme. Can I ask the committee to note the summary work programme, to note the provisional schedule of meetings for the next assembly year, delegate authority to me to agree in terms of reference for the committee's first provisional meeting, which we discussed earlier in the pre-meet, agree in relation to urgent matters only, a general delegation authority in consultation from the close of this meeting until the AGM on the 10th of May. The date of the next meeting is Tuesday, the 15th of May. I was going to thank guests and all colleagues for this municipal year. We're now going to move into the next one. So thank you, absent colleagues. Thank you, members. Thank you, members of the public. I have no any other business. Good day to you all. In their haste, they went.
GLA Chamber